we're a second-generation family business, basically. This business started in 1958, and at the time, it really started as a tool maker business. And on the side, my father-in-law, who had the business at the time, was trying to restore a 1931 Cadillac. Okay. And he wasn't able to find any of the rubber goods that he needed for his restoration. So being a tool maker, he knew how to make molds, and he had a friend a couple doors down that had a little rubber manufacturing plant. And, talking to him after work, the guy told him, he says, well, you know how to make the molds. Come here after closing when we're still here playing around and make the parts you need. So he started making parts for himself. And as people in his car club start finding out that he was making some of these parts, then they were asking him to make parts for them. And as he had a couple dozen parts, and he started advertising in a hobby magazine, which was Hemmings Motor News at that time, which is the big Bible of the antique car market. And then taking parts out to Hershey, Pennsylvania, to a car show up there. And that's really where it started. It was kind of a sideline thing. Then in the early 70s, when we had our first gas crunch, and the automotive industry was in a sewer, and all the tooling that he was making for the automotive industry was, a lot of the business was drying up. He found that he was making as much on selling rubber parts through mail order as he was in tool and die work.
So we're not, at least I'm not, I don't know much about cars. What would the rubber parts in a 1931 Cadillac be? Oh,
there's when you look at a car, it's amazing how many pieces of rubber you have. You've got rubber that goes around your glass to seal, rubber that goes on a running board, rubber mounts for the engine to sit on. Just about anywhere where you had, let's say, a light assembly or whatever sitting on a fender, there was a pad. So a variety of chassis and body parts. As the cars get newer and newer and newer, and then, when we look at rubber parts, you're looking at what it takes to seal the car out. Doors, windows, and trunk area and hood area. Those are the major parts. But in the early days, they even had rubber pads between the body and the chassis. So if you took the body off the chassis, you had to have, rubber pads in it. Because as the cars go down the road, it can't be rigid. It's got to move around a little bit, or you'd have an awful ride. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Suspension bushings, rebound pads on your suspension.
So on an antique car, there would be dozens or hundreds or thousands of different rubber?
A simple one like a Model T, there might be a dozen. Mm-hmm. But you get a car like a Cadillac, 41 Cadillac, and then you're talking about, you've got about $3,500, $4,000 worth of rubber on a car. And, when people think about rubber, they don't think about an expense, but it becomes a really big expense.
And many of these are parts that you wouldn't see outside?
There are many that you would see, yes.
Okay.
And then some that you don't. Okay. That are, we make, for the older restorations, most of those cars are completely coming apart and coming back together. So we make a lot of parts that you'll never see, but they have to be part of that restoration in order to have that vehicle act like it's supposed to.
Okay.
But for the newer cars, most of what we look at is what's actually visible, because that's what most people are concerned about. They're not taking the whole car apart. They're doing more of a visual restoration. So when you look at it, everything looks nice and new and everything.
And just to so I can get well grounded, when you say new versus old, is that like
when you're talking 70s, 80s, 90s? For us, that's new.
Okay.
When we're talking the teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, that's the old. I'd say right now, because of our buyers change all the time, because as for every year it seems like you got a group that's aged out in the sense they've gotten too old and they might not be around anymore, and the new group that's in has a different taste.
Sure.
So they might like to look at the old classics, which are the cars of the early 30s, but what they really want is a nice, road runner, with a Hemi motor, a muscle car or something. So now most of the stuff, the bulk of the business now is probably within the 60s, 70s, and starting to get into the 80s.
There are hundreds of models of cars that you must be dealing in, and there are hundreds of different pieces of rubber on each car. Do you stock all this stuff? Is all
We stock
custom?
a good many. We stock the majority of it.
Okay.
So you can see already information is very important. So we've got a pretty good library of parts information from the OEs, and that's becoming a problem now because on the newer cars of the later 90s and on, they don't they're not using microfiche, or they're not using books. They're on a direct hookup, and the only way you can do that is by being a dealer. So we start losing information. Then we have to start cultivating relationships with parts guys at the dealers so we can get information on part usage.
At what point, I don't know, I don't know if this is going to make sense, but I have a 2008 car, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would never be in your market, because if something happened to my car and I needed to
No,
fix a piece
right
of
now
it,
you wouldn't be.
I could. Where do people start getting into that market? Does that make sense? Is my question?
Yeah, what happens is for like a 2008, you can still go to the dealer and get parts from the parts department. At some point, those parts will dry up, and at some point, you'll have enthusiasts that really like that car, or at that period of time, there was a lot of demand for that car.
I see.
For more than just transportation. And you'll start seeing people grouping together in a little club or something of that sort. Mm-hmm. And they'll start supporting each other on putting these things together. Okay. And that's when we start looking, and we start going back into doing research to see how many of those cars were made, and how well do they sell, and do they have anything that makes them unusual, or collectible, or something that people like, and is there somebody already supplying that market? Because sometimes within a group, somebody in the group starts supplying them, and if there isn't and there's a need, then sometimes we'll contact the clubs and say, do you guys have a need for something? Mm-hmm. Or they'll be contacting us, is usually what happens. And
can you give us an example of it? What's the last car model that you started to support that way?
Oh, I think we went through about 6 or 7 in the last 2 years, because we've been really being very proactive on making parts. We made parts for Pintos. Okay, that's probably the most unusual one. People go, why Pintos? But they have a very strong club.
They all blew up.
They
were, well, as long as you don't get rear-ended, you're okay.
We had a
But so that was a project we finished about a year ago. We've been making a lot of parts.
So when you say a project, you mean you went back and reverse engineered the
rubber
parts on
we went and bought a Pinto, stripped the parts off of it, reverse engineered them, and made all the parts, and then fit them on the car to make sure they worked.
Make sure they fit.
We
must be a lot of fun. You must have paid
I've got one.
for that,
I've
right?
got one back there right now. I've got a '74 LTD that people have been asking for parts, and nobody has them. And so finally, he said, "Okay." We went out and got the car. And now we're replicating all those parts for that car, and that'll fit several years on LTD.
Where do you go buy? You just buy one on used?
Oh, well, look, I think that one we found on Craigslist, but, the Pinto I found at a local auction, and, we've done it.
You don't need ones in any kind of good shape, right? You just
No, as long as the rubber's in good shape.
Yeah.
So do people, is an alternative to buying some of this stuff from you to go to a junkyard and find an old one and take
The old rubber won't be any good.
Right. So that's
we can use it as a template, but it's gonna, a lot of the elastometers out of it. It's gonna be crumbly. It's we are always getting parts that we have to we try to get both sides of the rubber so we can compare them, because something will be missing off this side that might not be missing off that side, so we can figure out just exactly. Yeah, well, there's going to be lefts and rights when it fits on a door. You got a right door and a left door, and they all have their designs, and tools have to, and tools have to be made for the whatever we're trying to copy. And most of those are there's really more than just tools. You'll have tools for ends. You'll have extrusions. You might have to. Some of them have clips in them. I mean, there's a variety of things that we have to look at. They might have metal inside the end treatments. So they get pretty complex.
So you have obviously thousands of parts. That you have.
Right. I think right now we're close to about 12,000.
And you're stocking these? You can't.
Not all. I would say a good many. Some that sell very slowly, we don't stock. We just make, as
You'll
we
make
sell them.
one?
We'll make one, yeah. That's part of, I think when you had asked about what our competitive advantage was.
Yeah.
Part of, we're in a very niche market, but we've got about 3 or 4 other big players that compete against us in various parts. We're probably the only one that makes a wide range of parts, but we're also the only one that does most of our work in house. From design, tooling, manufacturing, all in house, and then sell from here. Most of my competitors do some work in house, but most of it they've gone now to overseas, and it makes it tough for me to compete price wise. But
but you can make things.
But
that
we can make things they can't make, and if we have to make any changes, we can make changes where it's a lot harder for them to go in and make changes. So we can serve the customer a heck of a lot better than they can.
So you said you have this location and the manufacturing.
I've got a little
distribution.
I've got just a warehouse in the Denver Industrial Park where we keep a lot of our longer term stuff. Plus, that's where we garage our cars, except for the one we're working on right now that I've got way in the back of the warehouse.
But you're making the stuff in this building here?
We have 3 buildings. We're making production buildings off to the side here. And the warehouse is behind us. What we do make at the tail end of this building is our tool room, where we do our design and tooling.
If it's not like proprietary or something, can we save 5
Sure.
minutes to look around?
Yeah, we can take a good quick look and go through it, and no
Okay.
problem.
Yeah.
I'll take you
Very
through all that.
curious to see what it looks like back there.
But it's we do it all. We can't do it the mass-produced type of way. We can't. We can't. Injection molding doesn't work for us because everything we do is small numbers.
Yeah.
So, but we've developed a way of doing transfer and compression molding, and we've developed our own presses so that we can very quickly take a mold out and take it off the shelf, put it in, make a quick run, put it back on the shelf, and lose almost no setup time. So, which is one of the benefits of.
Okay, so I think I'm getting to understand. So the idea is that the custom piece is the mold itself,
Right.
and then the mold might fit into various different molds may fit into the same machine that sort of
Right.
makes the product. And so if you have the mold, you can.
If I have the mold, I can make it
Okay.
and make it fairly quick.
Okay.
So what's the difference? I know I've actually seen injection molded plastic made. What's the difference between that and this?
Well, plastic, you heat, and then as you
Right.
put it in, you cool it to make. Rubber's the other way around.
sorry.
And you heat it, and you either transfer it into a cavity or you compress it into a cavity where you'll get a little outflow. And then once it hits a certain heat, it'll trigger the curing mechanism, and it'll cure out.
So how many people are all together in the whole thing?
I believe right now we're about 57 people.
And how many of them are doing production?
About half. I think we're right around 25 in production.
And then what do the rest do?
between
engineer.
customer service upstairs that takes orders, the administration part, we've got our IT. I've got a person that's in charge of looking at new projects. We get customers send us parts all the time, begging us to make them.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to really evaluate them before we make them. Because unfortunately, all the cost in this business is up front. And then it gets cheaper as you go afterwards.